Also in the early 19th century, we start to see an improvement in transportation. So as the economies were trying to grow, there was the need to ship products within and outside of the country, but more so within the country because the country was growing. So we start to see a need for improved mode of transportation. So like we said, the North and the South needed a way to transport their goods to and from each other. So the North needed a way to get the South's cotton, and the South needed a way to get the fabrics and the textiles from the North. So one way that they came up with was using steamboats. And steamboats, as well as steam locomotives, which we'll get to in a minute, they use natural steam power, which occurs when you burn something and you use the thermal energy from burning that and convert it into steam power, with the use of heat and water. And this was important because there was less manpower. And think about it, anytime humans have to do work, they eventually get to a point where they get tired and they get a little bit worn out and exhausted, where steam power or using physics in nature, there's no worry about exhaustion. It's really just about as long as you have the materials to burn to create that steam power, you could get it done that way. And also steam power allowed for faster travel. Even though it proved later to be dangerous, this was still something to where many manufacturers and many shippers and merchants were willing to make that trade-off to make the money, to make the bucks. So there's an old saying that goes high risk, high reward. So while steamboats were a little bit risky, the reward was a big payoff. So what they did is, especially in the North, there weren't as many navigable rivers. So they had to create their own rivers, which were called canals. And canals were dug out by hand or by man and machine across big stretches of land, especially when you had two rivers. If you have one river here and another river here, but there was no way in between to connect them, you would have to essentially go down one river, unload everything, put it on wagon and horseback, take it all the way across till you got to the other river and continue. Where canals, you could connect almost like making an H. So if you've got two parallel rivers and you have a connection in between by a man-made canal, that would certainly help out with transportation. And one of the most famous canals was the Erie Canal Project, which opened up the Port of New York and basically connected New York State to parts of Pennsylvania and Ohio and other areas that you can find on a map. So now with the innovation of steamboats and canals that were dug, goods were now easier to transport, which again lowered prices. So let's go back to that idea of economic rule of ease of transport. When something is easier to do, when it's faster to be done or to make or to transport or ship, if it's easier or if it's faster, that's going to lower the prices, because if you can make things faster, that means that you can raise the amount of quantity and you can meet demand a lot faster, and you're able to lower your prices because now you can attract more customers. So here you kind of see what a steamboat looks like in the upper left-hand corner. These are the digging of the canal. So you can see it's people basically just trenching out part of the ground, and then natural rainwater or runoff or infiltration from nearby lakes, rivers, streams, other bodies of water that fill that canal in. Once it's deep enough, you can have these larger steamboats go through there. So while canals were big in the North, we start to see more steamboats in the South. So it was kind of smaller boats or smaller steamboats in the North, but these larger, more commercial steamboats were a lot more common in the South because of the invention of railroads and the production of railroads in the North, which we'll get into right now. So railroads were an even faster way, or steam-powered locomotives were a faster mode of transportation that could be developed in the North. So these railroads, or these steam-powered locomotives, or trains, what we call them today, made transport quicker, easier, and safer, and which made for a bigger profit. So they could travel faster than wagons and steamboats. They were easier to operate than steamboats were, because steamboats, sometimes you couldn't go through certain riverways. It's a lot harder to navigate a steamboat and control it than it would be a train. A train is essentially running along a track. So as long as there's track there, there's really no need to drive or steer it. You're just making it go forward or you're stopping it. And they're a lot safer because of the fact that the that the steam process is done in really one car. And because of the fact that you didn't have to worry about something going wrong to where it could sink, like we're a steamboat, if something goes wrong and there's a leak in the steamboat, you've got big problems. The ship is going down. Whereas with trains, if something's wrong, you kind of just stop it, you fix it, but there's really no danger that goes on there, or less danger, I should say. You could travel longer distances. So using momentum, a train could get going and could go on momentum, whereas steamboats, especially if you're going against the current, that's going to require more coal and more steam power to be used, which sometimes they couldn't travel as far, or it was a little bit more costly. So trains were a little bit more costly to operate just because of the fact that they were traveling, with greater amounts of cargo in some cases, and also you're working with steel and iron to make them. So to create and to build it, it was a little bit more costly to operate, but the trade-off was you were making a bigger profit. So those costs kind of offset. And when I say costs, I mean the people who are shipping, not necessarily the customers who are buying the products. So there were certainly a lot more railroads in the north and in the west than there were in the south. So if you're thinking about what's the primary mode of transportation, in the north it was trains and railroads. In the south it was steamboats and canals. They still used horseback and wagons, but that was really more for, it was almost like the taxis or the Ubers or the Lyfts back at that time. You would hire somebody to take you from one place to another. And it was really, if you were wealthy, you could afford that a little bit more. But steamboats and trains were primarily used not for transporting passengers and social reasons. It was more for business reasons, shipping and cargo and freight. So trains and railroads did a great job of connecting cities. So now it was a lot easier to go from Chicago to Philadelphia to New York to Washington, D.C., whereas before it would take a lot longer and you'd have to go by wagon, which was not always the easiest method of transportation. It was bumpy. If the weather was bad, sometimes you couldn't go because it wasn't really covered that well. It wasn't well insulated. Whereas trains, you're inside of this iron-made or steel-made car, and there was a little bit better insulation, and so you could keep warmer. So because these trains helped to connect cities, business was done a lot easier. There were a lot more transactions made, and because of that, more goods were sold, and that certainly increased the economy. So when we're comparing the northern and southern economies, the development of the northern manufacturing and textile economy happened a little bit more rapidly than in the south. Now, the south certainly made a huge profit from all of that cotton, but in terms of their transactions, in terms of the amount of deals that they made, it wasn't quite as frequent as it was in the north, simply because trains could get you there a lot faster than steamboats could. But trains certainly helped connect the north and the south, because as cotton and other southern plantation products were grown and harvested and needed to be sold to northerners, you could get it there a lot faster. So you might take it part of the way by steamboat and then have trains, which really were from the Mason-Dixon line, or in other words, halfway between Northern America and Southern America, right along, Missouri, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia. That's where railroads and trains really started to become prominent, and it could take them the rest of the way.